Hey, this is Gabe Abelson, and you're watching the Letterman Podcast.
La, 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 la. Welcome once again to the Letterman Podcast. My name is Mike Chisholm. All right, tonight we got Andrew Buss. Andrew Buss is a writer. Again, another one of these people who I have given the moniker "a brother from another mother." I think the world of this guy. Has written a pile of oral histories on certain subjects, and I love the oral history. I talk about it with him. My favorite book on Letterman is Scott Ryan's book, The Last Days of Letterman, which is an oral history of the last 6 weeks of the show. Phenomenal book. Andrew has written many different versions of this type of style of writing. These oral histories are just tremendous, and he's done a bunch of them on different subjects, like The Jerk, like Gremlins 2, Scott Pilgrim versus the World. These are projects that I love. You can find him on Consequence of Sound. You can find him writing for Late Nighter, where he did an oral history of the infamous Madonna incident on Letterman. Just a really great guy. He's an Andy Kaufman historian. I mean, and those who have weathered their way through this show knows how much I love Andy Kaufman, and so we get to talk about that a little bit. And then, of course, we talk about Late Bloomer, which was his piece in Vanity Fair, the oral history of when Conan O'Brien took over late night. And very, very cool oral history on that in Vanity Fair. Highly recommend it. Go read it. This guy and I he has dove into his passions properly. He became a partner, but a mentee of Bill Zehme, and we talk about this book a lot. It's just a really great. It's a great conversation, and I really like this guy. Now, a couple things. He was going to come on here last week, but he had pneumonia, and he's still suffering from the pneumonia a little bit. And we just said, hey, let's do this. It'll work. It'll be good. But he wanted to do this so bad last week, and he had a fever and all that stuff. So he came on this week. Not only did he have the lingering effects of the pneumonia, thank goodness he's healed, but he's also in Fire Zone, LA, 2025. What do you say? I mean, Candy and I the other night were we just want to say we love our friends in California. We have a few of you who are displaced and potentially have lost your place. And we love you. And for those in the thousands like you who are in that place, we just want to say we're thinking of you, and we feel helpless watching this. But please know that there's love, and we'll help how we can. So anyway. Please enjoy my conversation with Andrew Buss. Andrew, I'm so excited to do this with you. I feel like just from your body of work and the admiration I have for the things that I have read, that you and I are brothers from another mother. I totally, totally believe that is the case. I am
That's so kind.
And I have when I have envy for people, there's no malice or jealousy to it. It's a kindness. It's a puppy dog kind of envy. Excited for the dog that has the bone that I would love to have. The projects that you have worked on. I just wanna go over some of the ones that are highlights to
Please.
me. Of course, we're going to talk about the Vanity Fair article on Conan's first, his first night, and then the turning point. That thing is awesome. I loved it so much.
Thank you.
Your work on Late Nighter, Consequence of Sound, Vanity Fair. You write for that. You're an Andy Kaufman historian, right there. I mean, I'm such a huge Andy Kaufman fan. You worked with Bill Zehme. We just did an episode recently on the Carson book that finally came out posthumously. But then you've got these other projects that all of which my heart is attached to. Scott Pilgrim, Clerks the animated series, The Jerk,
Mhm.
Gremlins 2, Zoolander, Freaks and Geeks. Did you just decide to be a writer and just immerse yourself in the things that you love? How
Yeah.
did you go down the path to building the career that you have? And I mean, I think you might be the king of the oral history of current pop culture. How did this happen, man? It's great to meet you. It's great to do this. How did this
It's
happen?
so great to meet you. Thank you so much. That is so kind. Great way to start off the day. But it really, yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It really is just finding the things that I love.
Yep.
And I mean, no one was, knocking on my door asking me to do a Clerks the animated series oral history. No one's asking me to do that stuff. I mean, what had happened was with the oral histories, I had been doing some work for years. I had been working at the Laugh Button. I had been
Hmm.
working, I had done a piece for Vulture on the time that Saturday Night Live went to Mardi Gras. That was a lot of fun to do. Um, and then what had happened was around 2019. I pitched an Airheads oral history to Consequence of Sound, and the editor there, Michael Rothman, who's become a very dear friend, he's a great dude. Um, he said, I would love to do this. Go ahead and, go out and do that. So I did that one. That was so much fun to do. And then I just kept working with them. And over the course of a year and a half, I think we did like 9 of them
Yep.
over a consequence, and that's when I did The Jerk and then High Fidelity, and then I did Clerks the animated series, and then Gremlins 2. I did The Freshman,
Yep.
the
Oh,
Marlon
that's
Brando
perfect.
movie.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
such a good movie. And then
Yep.
Scott Pilgrim. I'm trying to remember what were the others. We did one on Thief, and
Yep.
then I did Freaks and Geeks as well. So I did so much over a consequence, and then before moving over to Vanity Fair and doing Superbad and um, Zoolander, and
Hmm.
then of course the Conan one. But yeah, I mean, it really is just finding the things that I love and just kind of going down the rabbit hole with it. I mean, the oral history format, it's exhausting while I'm doing it.
Yep.
But there's nothing like it when I can look back and be like, okay, I did this right. Like it's
Okay.
one of the greatest feelings in the world.
It's like you're a prophet. This is exactly one of the places I want to go down first. The oral history book versus the typical type biography. I love all the books on Letterman that have been out. I love Zinnemann's book. Of course, I worship kind of Bill Carter and what he did with Late
Yeah.
Shift and things like that. But I have said right from the start, my very, very, very favorite book on David Letterman is Scott Ryan's book, The Last Days of Letterman, which is an oral history of the last 6 weeks of Late Show, and written in that oral history format. My favorite Saturday Night Live book is the Saturday Night Live oral history book, that one that came out. I guess it's, well, probably 10 years ago now. My
Grant
gosh,
Shales
yeah,
one.
it's phenomenal, phenomenal book. Um, Oral history versus biography. How did you find your way down that rabbit hole as a writer? And to you, um, I believe it is a harder experience. As Scott Ryan, certainly, he's written a bunch of them on Twin Peaks and some of the other ones. He's told me how much more difficult it can be to
Oh
do the
yeah.
oral history than a straight up, biography type style. What was it that led you down to that style of writing?
Well, I mean, I had always been fascinated with it. The Saturday Night Live one growing up was huge. I mean, that book I read so many times. And what I realized at a certain point, it was just something I always wanted to try. And I went to film school.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite aspects of going to film school, of course, I loved the screenwriting aspect. That's what I wanted to do. I originally wanted to be a screenwriter, but I also fell in love with editing, and oral histories are editing. I mean, it is editing, rather. When you're going through, just being able to take 10 people's stories and create one cohesive story, there's something really fun about that. Being able to work with have just, a blank page and have 10 different recollections of the same thing and then create one from those 10 different things. I mean, it's exhilarating when I get to do it right. And um it's exhausting and it's so tiring. And there are times where you're banging your head against the wall thinking, why do I keep doing this to myself? This is just you back yourself into a corner, but I always manage to find a way out. I don't know what it is. Like there's always just kind of a little way out that maybe I hadn't thought about when I started. The discovery factors. I'll
Yeah.
do some of these and I'll find things that I never would have imagined. Like the Clerks cartoon, I knew the story going into it, so it was helpful. But then
Yep.
there's some where I had no idea, like High Fidelity. I didn't know the story going into it. I found out the story as I was working on it. So it depends. It's a case by case thing, and there's so much fun when I get to stand back and read it, and I get to kind of remove myself from the equation because you're looking at everyone else's words in a way.
Um, there's a few things I want to get to based on what you just said, but one of the things you said was when it can be done right. And I'm very curious as to your perspective as to what that means is if when it can be done right versus not
It
so much.
it just depends. Like, I mean, there's definitely oral histories I've done where I look back and I mean, it's the people that you get.
Yep.
Um, I've always said that in order to do an oral history, you need the director, the writer, and the producer. The best ones have all three,
Yep.
but I can get away with it if I have one of the three. But
Hmm.
it depends on who it is. Like you need someone that can serve as your go-to,
Yep.
like kind of break glass in case of emergency type thing.
Yep.
So, like it- that's so important, and I've had so many of those. And so the best ones and the ones when they are done right are when I have someone like that, and I've done them where I don't have that to fall back on, and then I will come in more as the narrator. Or occasionally, like I did a Phantom of the Paradise one
Hmm.
recently, and I didn't have that. I didn't have the producer, writer, or the director, and it was the first time I never had any of them. So what I had to do was I had to use a historian on Phantom of
Hmm.
the Paradise to kind of help me fill in those blanks, and then I also filled in the rest of the blanks, and I still made it work really well, and I'm still very proud of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's such an essential part of it that maybe most people wouldn't realize. You need someone to help you serve as the narrator.
That makes a lot of sense. Scott Ryan, who's become good friend now, he talked about with Last Days of Letterman. It was Shecky. Shecky was his go-to guy, and he
Right.
was the guy that he called to more than anybody to fill in little details about things that other people said when he maybe didn't want to go and talk to that other person again. Hey, can you give this some color? Can you round this out a little bit? And instead of having to put in some of his narrator notes to connect these things, he just would either put in another Shecky quote or it would help round that out. That makes a lot of sense that you would say it that way. So my curiosity about what it is that you do, you did the article on Late Nighter about the Madonna Letterman, the infamous Madonna night,
Yes.
with Letterman, and that was lovely because again on this show I've had many of the people that you talked about there, but even people who weren't in your article have been on and on our show and talked about that. And I read that article and it had such a life to it because it kind of does seem like a documentary, but on the page. It's the people. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful part of the process. Now, the part of the process that I'm in love with when it comes to podcasting is exactly this part here. And I'm curious, when you do your interviews with people, how much do you love that versus the editing? Is it all equal? Do you find that you've gotten stronger as kind of an interviewer over time? I'm really curious about that because some of the people that you interview to do these oral histories, it is literally a laundry list of the people that you would love to have a conversation with if you're a conversationalist. And I imagine, just like myself, I get better at it over time. You've gotten better at it over time. That's safe to say that that's the case.
Yeah. I mean, I've done probably with all the oral histories because you talk to a lot of people. For those, I'd say I've probably done, I mean, I have done over 300 interviews, I would say at this point,
Yeah.
and which is so tiring when I think of how much I've done with those. But I mean, the more you do it, obviously you do get better. And it like, I'm nervous. I still get nervous sometimes with
Yeah.
certain people, especially. There's
That was
definitely an intimidation factor. I'm working on one I can't talk about yet, but what I can say is I was talking to someone the other night and we spent an hour and 45 minutes on the phone, and I still felt intimidated talking to this person, not because they were the biggest name, but because of their body of work. It
mhm.
really depends on who it is that you're talking to, and um it just, you develop skills. And one of the most important things I developed from, or I learned from watching Bill Zehme for all those years
Mhm.
was not so much how to be an interviewer, but how to be a conversationalist, how to put the person you're talking to at ease,
Yeah.
how to manage and navigate those situations to make them comfortable. And I got to watch him in action a couple of times, and he would make the person he's talking to feel like the most important person in the world.
Yeah.
And there's such a skill to that. And it's something that I'm so lucky that I got to see him do it, but also it came natural to him because he was naturally the most charming person you could
Let
imagine. Like
let's go back.
there's
Let's go back
yeah,
here because you had a special relationship with him. I want to know, first off, to give the viewers and the listeners who might not know who Bill is, who is Bill? But how did you get connected with him in the first place, and what was your role with him?
absolutely. Bill was he was a journalist, he was an author, he was within the 80s and the 90s, 2000s, he did so many celebrity profiles. He did what is so unique. It wasn't your standard celebrity profile. Everything he did had a bit of an edge to it. There,
Hmm.
he was able to kind of parody the format while he was doing it in the greatest way. I mean, he was naturally this gifted writer. He interviewed David Letterman, of course.
Hmm.
I'll mention him first, but he did all the cover stories for Rolling Stone and
Yeah.
Esquire during that time.
Yep.
Everyone from Madonna, Eddie Murphy, Dana Carvey. He did Sharon Stone, of course, Warren Beatty. I mean, it just goes on and on, the people that he interviewed. And then, of course, he wrote books. He wrote books on Andy Kaufman. He wrote books on Frank Sinatra, Johnny Carson, with, was the great white whale of his that he finally was able to conquer that interview in 2002
Yeah.
for Esquire. And then he wound up spending, the last 18 years of his life working on a book about Johnny Carson.
Yeah.
So
And by the way, if you haven't read Carson the Magnificent, especially
Carson the
for people,
Magnificent,
I
yeah,
say this to people all the time. The magnitude of the star that Johnny Carson was during our teenage years and before that, of course, my father's years growing up, he was the biggest star in the world. And a lot of people don't realize that. I believe that Bill's book is actually a phenomenal entry point for people who may not
absolutely.
know, because it's not a textbook style biography. It was clearly written by somebody. This is where I love about this book. My favorite part about it, because I identify with it, is he kind of puts his fan first forward,
He does.
and many times that doesn't happen when biographers write on their subject. They if they do have personal regard for it, many times they hide that or they mask it. He does not do that in this book,
You
and
you can read the book and know exactly how Bill felt as he was writing the book, and that is
yes,
so rare.
yes,
And he really, I mean, he revered Johnny Carson,
yeah,
and you can feel that in every page of that book.
yep,
And I think it's so important to what that book is. And that's why I love that book, because you can really feel the passion for the subject material leaping off the page when
yeah.
he's writing it. And it's done in a style that's, nobody writes in. anymore. Like it's just like it's so sorry. The nature of kind of writing biographies has changed so much because, our attention as readers have changed since he started working on the book.
Yep.
So it's kind of a time capsule of a certain time. And I want to go back and finish
Yeah,
kind
please
of
do. How you got
answering
connected
your
with them.
question
Yeah.
before. And by the way, I do not think I did him justice trying to explain who he is. I've never really had to audibly kind of explain. I've had to explain who he is times over the years, but it's always difficult because it's like trying to put him in a box. It's so tough. Like he was so many things, like as a writer. Like he's one of those writers where everybody can take little different things out of reading his work.
Yeah.
Like, you could read it for this aspect or that aspect. For me, I always loved um the details. He was the most detail-oriented writer and that's why it's so tough for his style to be replicated because no one else could do what he did. I was lucky enough when I would send him things sometimes. He would send me notes. I on the Vulture thing in particular, he sent me notes, and his notes were just so fantastic. It was the and
Is that
so
how you got
many of
connected
them
with
made it
him?
in.
Is that how you got connected with him originally? Was he saw your
No,
writing and connected that way, or how did that
no,
happen?
I connected with him when I had only written one article ever. Like I had done next to nothing. I had done nothing actually.
Hmm.
I was just fresh out of film school. I was 21 years old. Um, or I think I was 22 by that point. And Andy Kaufman's sister Carol, who I'd gotten to know because I was working on a project towards the end of my time in film school. I wanted to do an Andy Kaufman project that never came to fruition. But she, after knowing her about a year and a half, introduced me to Bill. I remember we had dinner at his house. It was me, Carol, her husband, her son Jason, Mike Thomas, and Bill. It was just a great dinner, I remember. And that night, first time I'd ever met Bill, we were talking, and he's like, you know, I think you should come by the house, and I have a bunch of Andy stuff, and I think it's time to kind of give someone the keys. And so he gave me all his Andy stuff to hold on to, not to keep, but to hold on to,
Yeah.
and just to help me with the project I was working on, and it was so incredibly helpful. And then that day, he's like, "Well, I need someone to kind of help me with the stuff I'm working on," and he had asked me to kind of come in as his chief editorial assistant, as he used to call me. And yeah, I spent 7 years working with him as his right hand guy, and it was everything you could imagine. Like it was all like I did all the transcribing, but also it was so much more. It was just getting to pick his brain and, sit there.
You sat
And
under a wisdom tree for 7 years.
I did.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, we would like it would be everything from, I would watch him a couple times. I didn't get to do it very much, but I got a couple times to see him, to be there when he was doing interviews. My favorite was he was interviewing, she is recently passed away, but he was interviewing the Chicago legend that was Chili Pepper. She was a drag queen.
Yeah.
And you're familiar. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, and I remember he was interviewing Chili Pepper at the in the lobby of the Ambassador East, right adjacent to the pump room.
Yeah.
So that was the first time I ever got to see him do an interview in person, was Chili Pepper. And that was always fun. getting to be a fly on the wall for that one. And then afterwards, I was walking back to my car. Bill went one way, and then Chili Peppers going the same way I was. And it was a 5 minute walk, but I can't tell you how much I laughed. Like it was just one of the strangest experiences. But and then I was with Bill when he did an interview with Sharna Halpern, which was one of the last interviews he did. She had founded IO. The old, what was Improv Olympic became IO in Chicago.
Yeah.
And so that was, I think that was the last interview he ever did. And I was there with him for that. And again, this was during a period he hadn't been working on the Carson book really when I knew him, because it had kind of been filed away, waiting. He was waiting to get better, and unfortunately, he never really did.
Yeah. I'm really grateful because we had heard about this book. Like that's the thing. People who were enthusiasts of this genre
I had heard of it.
yeah, we knew that it was coming. We knew the deal was there. It was done, or in process anyway. You know, we knew that he had the last interview with Johnny and spent time with Johnny after
Yeah,
the
of
fact,
course.
which is fascinating to those of us who were hoping, as Johnny said in his final address to everybody, that he would find a project and come back and entertain us or spend time with us in different ways. He never did, and we knew that Bill was kind of the link to that time afterwards, you know.
Right.
So when the book came, I was very, very excited. It was funny at my local bookstore the day that it came out. There was four people that were there, and it's funny because all four of us were like, oh, this is like, it was like we're in the same club, kind of like growing up as a Letterman fan, with late night. You always knew who the other Letterman fans were in school, and I love that kinship that's there, and I certainly recommend the book. I just love the fact that you got to have the mentor-mentee relationship with a guy like this. And I mean, you're carrying his spirit on with what it is that you do, including the enthusiasm for your projects. I read the Vanity Fair oral history, and it's been a year. And one of the
Mhm.
things that you were always a guy when that article came out originally, I was like, I want to talk to this guy. And then of course life and all sorts of stuff
Right,
happens,
everything
and
happened,
stuff.
yeah.
And then I saw that you posted, you said, it's been a year, and I can't believe it's been a year since this thing came out.
Right.
And to give context, I highly recommend that Late
Thank you.
Bloomer is what the article is called, that everyone would go.
Yes.
Anybody who likes the Letterman Conan transition period and likes learning and studying about that, this is a phenomenal way, viewpoint to look at these events. The Vanity Fair article, Late Bloomer, it's called. Andrew Buss, Oral History. It's about a year ago that it came out.
Mhm.
And you got a chance to talk to, and I just want to throw this out there really quick here. Of course, okay, Conan, Jeff Ross, Lauren Michaels, David
Mhm.
Letterman, of course, Andy Richter, Janine Garofalo, Sarah Silverman, Max Weinberg, Robert Smigel, Lisa Kudrow. You talked to Dino, Bob, and Bob Odenkirk, the writers, Paula Davis from Talent, Jeff Garland, Jim Pitt, who did the music. Like, you talked to all of these people about that
Yeah.
time period. Phenomenal right there. Just the conversations. I have conversation envy of you right now that you've had conversations with these people. The first question I do want to ask, though, was
Mhm.
there anybody who you wish you could have gotten that you didn't get?
Not not for that one. I got everybody I really wanted. There was one or two people that I were trying. I think the only people that I tried to get that I didn't get were what was it? Oh, it would have been Drew Barrymore and John Goodman were the only two because they were in the first episode.
Makes sense.
But those were the only ones. I can't think of anybody else that and by the way, I mean, um, who knows what their memories would have been.
Yep.
It was kind of like, it was a small part of their history versus a bigger part of everyone else's history that I talked to.
Yep.
Um, But yeah, those are the only ones that I reached out to that I didn't get for the piece. Everybody else I reached out to um, were game to participate.
Anybody hesitant and they came in along the way? I know that happened with Scott with his book. Sometimes that probably happens for you, right? You get a project, you don't think you're going to have somebody and you
Yeah.
get them later on.
I mean, there's people, I wouldn't say they were hesitant. I mean, there were people that took a while to schedule. I
Yeah.
mean, the whole interview itself took a while to schedule. I mean, all the interviews themselves took a while just because of the writer's strike.
Right.
And
That's
the,
right.
yeah, this
Yeah.
was in the middle of the strikes. I pitched it right before the strikes, and it took us until, everyone was given a clear with the writer's strike that it was okay to, yeah, and that wasn't until the fall. So it was a couple of months that we couldn't do it because of the strikes, but finally we were given the clear to do it once the strikes were over. Um, but yeah, that was very difficult, kind of hurdle for it. But yeah, nobody was hesitant, and some scheduling is easier than others. Letterman happened late in the game, I
Hmm.
remember.
Hmm.
Um, Lisa Kudrow happened really late as well.
Oh, interesting.
That happened. I think she was the last interview I did. I think I did her interview on a Friday, and I turned it in on a Monday, I'd like to say.
Yep.
And she's interesting because I did her interview on a Friday, and then Matthew Perry passed away the next day on that Saturday. So that was really, um,
Whoa. Gives you the
that was,
willies
yeah.
a
I
little
know,
bit.
yeah. It
Yeah.
was, yeah. I
Um,
know, and that was such a tragic loss. I remember that next day. Just, yeah, it was horrible.
I love every pretty much every narrative from Conan's camp that has talked about this amazing event in entertainment history. Lisa's always mentioned, and I always find that really charming that
Yeah.
Conan and Lisa were both friends in an improv group together, grinding it out together as they were both kind of moving up, figuring out who they were and where they were going to fit in entertainment history, and it all happened at kind of the same time, their ascension. And it's so charming to me that these two friends, no pun intended, and I'm really grateful. Like I smiled really big when she was included in the article. I remember reading that because I just love that, Lisa's there cheering him on, and the day that he did his his test show on this on the Tonight Show set, she was part of that and trying to figure out, wardrobe and I love Lisa's
Right.
piece in that, and I'm glad that she was included in there. Um,
Absolutely.
so how did this assignment was this something that you were like,
This was me.
this was all you, and you pitched
All
Vanity
me.
Fair and they said, yeah,
Yep.
let's do it, go for it, and
Yeah, and I give them a lot of credit because I'm not pitching something that is right kind of on the nose. I'm pitching um what I really love to do is hyper focus things. I love hyper focusing things. It brings me so much joy. I'm not doing an oral history of Conan O'Brien's late night career because that would be daunting. I'm
oh
not
no.
doing it on late night because that was 16 years. That would also be daunting. The story of how he got the job is very interesting, of course, and unparalleled to anything else. But I was fascinated. I'm like, it doesn't end there. It doesn't end when he goes on the air. I know that he fought for years. And by the way, even after the oral history only covers a year,
Hmm.
it doesn't cover the next year and a half, 2 years after that, that he was still struggling. It wasn't until the third anniversary, which right before the anniversary, they had a brand new set. Once
Yeah.
you see them with a new set, that then you realize that okay, things are kind of safe. Once they spend
Yep.
money to redo the set, you're like, okay, these guys are going to be here a while. But
Yep.
I mean, it was touch and go. The Tom Shales reversal, which I'll talk about really quickly, which is, he wrote horrible reviews of the show in the early years. They were just, talked about how horrible the show was. And This would have been September of 93. And I
Yep.
think in the fall of 95, it took 2 years.
Yep.
I think he was the first one to go, wait a minute, this is the best show comedy on TV right now. And
Mhm.
I'm sorry. Like, I stand corrected. He did, and this was a time when critics held a lot of weight in TV, especially him.
Yep.
Like, he held so much power with what he did. Um, basically, um, people would turn to him and
Yep.
turn to him in the Washington Post. And I mean, he had all that power and he was able to go and just say, I was wrong. These guys are doing the best comedy on TV right now.
Yep.
And it's really remarkable that that's when things started to change. And with with the I'm so sorry, I think
No,
I've
no, no.
gone on a tangent.
No, no, no,
Um,
no. Actually, what you're talking with Tom Shales, it was very, very important. We had David B. and Cooley on last week, and one of the questions I asked him, we brought up, oh, I think it was I think it was on camera. I brought up Shales and his reversal with
yeah,
Conan. I said, "Have you ever had any of those in your career?" And we went down that path. To me, that was, these TV critics back then. Again, people don't
yeah,
necessarily understand that because social media has opened it up, and everybody has a voice, and there's so many voices out there, and it's hard to. But back then, there were a lot of trusted voices. Bill Carter was one, Bean Cooley was one. Tom Shales might have been, the biggest one in
yeah,
many people's worlds, and he did this massive about face when it came to Conan, and
absolutely.
it was
And
a huge thing when he did that.
I got to talk to him many, many years ago about it. And yeah, I talked to him a couple times.
Yeah.
We would message a bit during this one period, but yeah, I talked to him many years ago. It's probably going back 9 8 9 years ago at this
Yeah.
point, but I remember talking to him about the whole Conan thing. But I think what were you talking about before? I think you had asked me um just kind of how it came together.
Yeah, no, well,
Kind of
but
if
I'm
I
glad you went
had
down
the
this path
idea.
because this is where Dave comes into the conversation. Like, I'm really glad you went to
Yeah,
this place. This is exactly one of the things I wanted to make sure we hit today because
of
yes, the
course,
Tom
Dave.
Shales thing was probably from a broader perspective the big moment, but for me as a viewer back, I
Having
loved
Dave
late
on the
night,
show, yeah.
but having Dave on the show, yeah, because I loved late night. I felt that they continued, and you did a great job hitting this part in the oral history too about um, how do we call it late night? Do we still call it late night? And NBC's like, yeah, you're calling it late night. We're building a franchise here. So here we
Right.
are, these guys who want to come
Which
in
is
here.
interesting. They knew they had a franchise, but it was only one guy.
Yes.
Like that's what's fascinating to me. Like it's not unheard of that they changed the name of the show.
No.
Like that idea was to me, it was never like, oh my God, how dare they change the name of the show? It was an 11-year run under one guy
With one
that had
personality, very, very, very in
late night
cement,
could have been
very, yep,
him.
yep.
Like, I get what they were doing, and it worked, by the way.
Oh, it
Late
did.
night is no longer just associated with David Letterman. Which, by the way, I think is for the best because it allows Dave to be associated with himself, not one franchise. So
Exactly.
I think that's important that these franchises that it created two insane, iconic franchises, but I think it's important that they live on without him because then he can get all the credit for what he did, not the name of the show.
I
Um,
totally agree with everything that you just said. Carter talks about that in Late Shift. It wasn't the Tonight Show, and he tried in the War for Late Night. He tried to say it again. It wasn't the Tonight Show. It was. Were you on Johnny Carson last night? Have you ever been on Johnny Carson? Have you
right.
ever? That was the magic. Was the host was, and of course, but at the same time, when you're a corporation, a broadcast company like NBC, you're like, no, 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 it is a franchise, and we are going
Right.
to keep this trainer moving. Um,
Although I do also understand the flip side with the Tonight Show being its own thing, and I understand obviously I understand the appeal of what that show has meant to so many people that have wanted to host it, and especially in the Conan side of thing. I definitely understand the appeal of what that show means, especially its association with Carson. Um,
Absolutely. Both Dave and Conan, like they
yeah,
were transfixed by the franchise. They the dream was to be the
right.
host of the Tonight
Absolutely.
Show, you know. But us as enthusiasts of this stuff, we don't really care. And I mean, as Conan proved as he went over to TBS, and then now as his podcast empire is just growing and growing, it's so good. The fans don't care. The fans care about the
No,
person. But I do understand the historical significance. I mean, it's the Letterman
absolutely.
podcast. You know, that's it's all about nostalgia. It's all about these things, and the balance of this is very, very interesting. I thought that Conan and Company, Smigel, I would put him and Jeff Ross up at, you know, the Brain Trust, you know,
Yeah,
Lorne Michaels as well. I thought they did a phenomenal job of creating something completely new, but still was late night as opposed to what the Tonight Show was. I thought that they did a great job of keeping the spirit of what Dave did, probably because of the zaniness, even though, you know, the other devices were removed and clearly it was a very different show.
yeah,
But I thought that, you know, if you're looking at Late Night with David Letterman, if someone else is going to host Late Night as a franchise, I thought they did a very, very good job living up to what Late Night
absolutely.
was.
Absolutely. And what they did that was so interesting, I think it worked so well, is they went in there with their sensibility, knowing exactly what the show is going to be. From day one, their idea of um, let's make it silly.
Yeah.
Let's do Pee-wee's Playhouse vibes. Let's do this vibe. Like they knew exactly this is what we're going to do. Where um take away kind of the awareness of it and have Conan play the straight man
Yeah.
to everything that happens around him, have him steering the ship, not kind of doing a wink to the camera, the
Yeah.
commitment to it. I think that was so important to carving out what the identity of that show is. And what's so interesting is, I mean, these guys just took the assignment so seriously, and that's why it worked because it's not like the network was like come in and do something completely different, come in and do like the network kind of just gave them the keys
Hmm.
and um yeah, I mean there's things that they wanted to do that um they definitely had to find out how to produce a television show while they were doing it.
Yep.
Um But I mean, what's so fascinating is if you look at that first week of shows
Hmm.
they did, these are some of the things they did from day one were they did the first thing they ever did was a bit called actual items. And that's a bit that they would do for years and years and years, which was kind of a parody of what
Of headlines.
of Jay Leno's
Yeah.
headlines. Yes, where they would take where instead of finding real headlines, they would say these are absolutely real headlines, and they were the most insane, clearly comical things you could think of. It was really good. The next day, they did Clutch Cargo. They had they had Smigel doing Clutch Cargo.
Yep.
I think Clinton was the first one. Um,
Oh yeah, I mean, that's
and
the one that comes
then
to mind. Whenever you think of that bit, that's the one that
you
comes to
think of
mind is the
Clinton,
Clinton.
yeah.
Yeah.
Clinton, Schwarzenegger was another one.
Yep.
Bob Dole, it was the 90s.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean they did those. And then in the year
Didn't they? I was just gonna
2000,
say, didn't they do? They did the year
that was
2000 early on.
early on.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I mean all of these things they did within the first year went on to become staples of his career. If they made it, like all these things they did became staples of his late night career, and it was all in the first week. So these guys came in with they already were defined by the time they went on the air. And
So
but
what you just said, though, I mean, when you think about how we're comparing the two late night
Yeah.
franchises from Dave to what you just said. The commonalities are astounding. They're going to learn how to produce a show on the fly. Yeah, check that. I mean, certain with the morning show with Dave, that was a big part of that learning curve. But still, when they moved over to late night, same thing. We're gonna do this, learn how to do this on the fly. But also, you think about things that happened within the first, little while of late night with David Letterman, Stupid Petrix. My good friend Steve Weiner, he wrote the gag. He first off introduced Calvert DeForest. He only lasted with late night for a year. But he introduced Calvert DeForest, Larry Bud Melman, the card going through the window, the glass breaking. That was a mailbag segment, which, by the way, very beginning, at the very and then they had these things that went through the entire franchise. The same thing happened with Conan and Late Night in its infancy as well. And I just think that comparison is the comparison. Late Night with David Letterman, they were learning right on the fly, just like they did with Late Night with Conan O'Brien. They
Right.
give them that chance to do that. Some bits, original bits that happened. The mailbag, which is where the very first card through the glass with the sound effect of the glass breaking, that happened very early on. Stupid Petrix, very early on. A lot of these things very early on
Yes.
as they were finding their voice, and then things that would go through the entire franchise. They were given the latitude to do that. I do want to talk about Dave coming
Hmm.
on the show because I remember
Of course.
that was when I loved Late Night right away. With Conan O'Brien, I thought it was fantastic right away. I loved the zany, the silly, the Pee Wee's Playhouse as you talked about there. But there was a lot of tumultuousness. I remember people didn't take him seriously. There was a whole lot of things. But then when Dave came on as a guest, that night was absolutely spellbinding. And I mean, if I had a chance to talk to Dave about events in the past, that is one thing that I would certainly want to talk to him about because that night was electric. You being able to talk to Dave about that. First off, do you do most of your interviews via the phone or online, or do you do a lot of them in person? And with Dave, I assume Dave was on the phone.
Dave was on Zoom,
Oh, he's
which I
on
was
Zoom.
not expecting. I expected it to be on the phone. Yeah, I do most. I would say 99.5%, almost exclusively on phone or Zoom. Not very often in person. I've done occasional ones in person,
Mhm.
more for the books, really.
Yeah.
But less so much for the Vanity Fair stuff. But anyway, um, yeah. So Dave, I was trying for weeks and weeks to get, and then finally it came together. I remember. So they're like, he'll do it over Zoom, and I'm like, oh my God, that's even cooler. And what's really interesting about it, um, is so there was a whole set, like it was a buildup just to seeing Dave. Like there was something so iconic just about that moment when I get to see him for the first time on Zoom. It stands out in my mind. What it was so I it starts with me and the publicist talking in the Zoom room. And
Yep.
then Dave's assistant joins and it's her for a second. And then she calls out into the kitchen in the background that was, just had natural light, but it looked pretty dark in there.
Yeah.
She's like, Dave, are you ready? And he's like, yeah. So he walks out and kind of emerges out of the kitchen almost as if he's making a grand entrance. And then he sits in the chair, and it was just the coolest move. Um, I got to talk to him for 20 minutes. And I mean, he's one of those guys that I just never thought that I would interview.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, for some reason, Conan, I always had a feeling I'm like, one day I'll cross paths with him because Conan was my late night guy. Conan
Yeah.
was, and absolutely no disrespect, none whatsoever. I admire so much about David Letterman and what he did with the format.
Oh yeah.
Um, when I say Conan's my late night guy, that's because that's who I grew up watching. But
Yes.
then, when you get to a certain age, I went back and I discovered the genius and the artfulness of what Dave did. And I discovered the same with Carson. and Johnny.
I was
So
going to say we have a lot of folks who latched onto this show right away, who are just diehard Dave fans, who have done the same thing. They've discovered Carson
right,
because of that, because of the reverence that Dave had for Carson, because of some of the
absolutely.
similarities. Yeah, and the
And
same
that
could be said
happened
with
with me
Conan and
with,
Dave.
yeah, I mean, Conan has so much reverence for both of those men.
Yeah,
Like it, so that was part of it as well, was learning, well, this is the guy, these are the guys that shaped the guy that I like, so I might like them too. So then you go back and you watch, and um, I remember, yeah, I mean, watching in probably around right as YouTube was coming around. I That's when I first started watching old clips of Letterman from the 80s from the late night show, and that's
yeah,
when I would discover like, I one of the earliest things I saw was him dropping stuff off a building. I
of
remember that
course.
was one of the early ones, and just thinking, I'm like, oh, this was on television. Like this is crazy that this was that that people were tuning into television and just watching a guy throw things off a building. Like it was something so magical about it.
Yeah.
Um, and then of course that's and then just sorry,
No, no worry.
covered stupid pet tricks and everything else. Um, but yeah, so with Dave, I got to interview him, and it was so much. There was something about it. What I realized that I didn't expect going into it was when I'm sitting here and I'm talking to him, I'm like, oh, there's something about him that I just wanted to. I just I was hanging on every word, and I didn't real. I wasn't. It wasn't intimidation, but talking to him, I realized this guy. Immediately, you realize why just the effortless charm of him, and just why so many people wanted to sit on a couch talking to him. And
Yeah.
I immediately realized what it was. Even though I'm the one doing the interviewing, I just became transfixed by listening to him tell a story. And it's
You
just,
got the story. If you read the
yeah.
oral history, all the Letterman, all the beats that you would want to have are
And
there,
and
including
he
Conan and Letterman's going back and forth
that
on
was
the
my favorite part.
that absolutely,
That was
absolutely.
my favorite part. Him telling, because Conan, in the first interview, I didn't have a chance to go into that stuff. And then I sent an email a couple days later. I'm like, hey, can I talk to Conan again about this stuff? And his assistant's like, yeah, of course. So Conan and I talked about all the Dave stuff. And I remember telling Conan that day, I'm like, I'm really trying to get Dave because I'd love to have his take on it. Um, and
What
I
do you say?
think
Good luck.
I think no, I think I told Conan, I'm like, we're working on it, it might happen. And I think he said something like, well, there might still be some smoke coming out of the Vatican yet, that kind of I think that was his response.
What a
But
great line. Okay, so
um
here's my question. So you hit the
yes,
beats, which is great because that moment, again, the essay, I won the essay. Like that's my favorite part of that. I love that so much, and it was the
same
moment
here.
where
That's
he
my
came
favorite
back,
part.
and you nailed that moment. You nailed it perfectly. So my
Well, that
question
was
is
all
this:
done.
you
Yeah.
got the beats, but did Dave turn around and start interviewing you? Because one of the things that I've heard with many of the people who have talked to Dave is that he ends up becoming curious about the person interviewing them and asking them questions about them, and sometimes they don't get what they want to get because he kind of takes over a little bit. Did you get any of that?
No, not so much within the meat of the interview, although at the beginning he had asked me, he's like, so had we talked before, that kind of thing. So he
Yep.
wanted to know a little more about that. And then Dave and I talked about Bill at the very
Oh,
beginning.
that's
That meant a lot to me.
yeah.
I
Oh,
brought up because Dave had given me a quote. I had never talked to him, but he had given me a quote when I was working on the Vanity Fair piece on Bill. He had given me a quote. He was kind enough to do it. And so I thanked him for that. And then he told me the story about how when Bill had interviewed him the first time, Dave was worried that he sent him back to Chicago with nothing. And Dave's like, I thought that I just ruined. I'm like, this poor guy. I sent him back with nothing. And of course, that was not the case. But
yeah.
um, I was talking to him about Bill, and then Dave said, I think his dad, or it was Dave's dad and Bill's grandfather were both in the florist business. They were
Yeah.
friends.
Yeah. No,
So
are you
Bill's
kidding me?
grandfather and Dave's dad were friends. And there's a photo that I've seen of a group photo, and the two of them are side by side, and it's kind of circled, Dave's dad, Bill's grandfather. I mean, there was just this connective tissue to those two guys. Um,
Aren't those the best feelings in the world? Like when that happens,
yeah.
that's the stuff that's precious to me.
And
Those where you don't think there are coincidences and those just little magical
and
kind of serendipitous moments.
and what I loved is that Dave remembered all of it. I remember that that meant something to him. I texted Bill's daughter afterwards, and I got very emotional. Just that, Bill made an impact on Dave, that, because that would mean the world to Bill. And yeah, it would mean the world that he made an impact on someone like Dave. Bill knew, but at the same
Yeah.
time, you know, they hadn't talked in many, many, many years.
Yeah.
So getting to talk to him about Bill meant a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
I can see why that would mean so much to you. That's precious.
it was. But the Conan thing, yeah, when we were talking about Conan, the other part of it that I loved is that Dave remembered beat by beat that conversation with Conan sitting on the couch. And look, he probably hasn't seen it since it happened. I don't think he goes back and looks at clips
Agreed.
and stuff.
Yep.
So that was all muscle memory, and he remembered exactly kind of how it went down. And um that was really memorable. And there's one piece I do want to bring up that Dave told me that I never knew. Excuse me.
By the way,
Sorry
let's
about
throw the
that.
audience in
Yeah,
on this.
yeah,
You're coming off
yeah.
pneumonia. You're
I'm
coming off
coming off
pneumonia. Like we
pneumonia.
were going to do
Yes,
this a while back, and
I
then
know.
you
Yes,
had walking pneumonia. You poor guy.
I did. Yes, a
I'm
week and a
glad you're
half
better
ago.
now.
Thank you. Yes. But anyway, yeah, Dave was telling me this thing I had never heard, which I love so much, which is there was about a 2 or 3 week period, or no, it wasn't week. I think it was months
Hmm.
because oh no, it was well, when did the CBS show start?
93.
Or do you know the
August of
date?
93.
August? Okay.
Yeah.
So there was a couple of weeks where you could watch David Letterman at 11:30 at night on
Yeah.
CBS,
Yeah.
turn over to NBC and see him at 12:35 on NBC. So you could watch him back to back on two different networks.
Because they were running reruns because
Yes,
it was their deal. Yep.
because they didn't have because Conan wasn't on yet.
Yep.
And Dave told that to me, and of course, in his fashion, he's like, "Oh boy, that's what everybody wants. More me." Um, but he told me that fascinated me. It didn't make it in a Vanity Fair, but that always stuck with me. I'm like, wow. Like, just that is unheard of.
Yep.
To host two television shows on competing networks
Yep.
simultaneously.
Well,
Like,
and I mean, NBC would be
crazy.
stupid not to. They have the
Well, of
rights to do
course.
it. They'd be stupid not. It's the biggest story in entertainment at the
Yeah.
time when he moves up. They'd be stupid not to until, yeah, it makes so much sense that
It's
they would do it.
so crazy
Yep.
though. Like,
Yep.
just
He'd
I
be his own
love
lead in.
he was, yeah, like you could literally channel surf and still see him. Like, it just there's something about that. I love my minutia
Yeah.
in details, of course, talking about Bill earlier and how he was so good at being detail oriented. The details of that
Yeah.
fascinating.
Delightful. Um, I I know that, oh man, I hate that we have 10 minutes left. So here's the deal. Uh if I have to cut this next part out, I'll cut this next part out. But
Go
I'm
for
super
it.
curious. You're involved in the Andy Kaufman doc. We've talked about this a little bit on the
Yeah.
show because there are details that are out there. We know that it's done. We know that they're like in different a different phase now, where the phase is
Yes.
basically distribution and getting all that stuff figured out. That's kind of out there right now. You were involved in the Andy Kaufman doc, which I'm so grateful to
I
hear.
am. Yes.
After years, years ago, you were handed kind of the keys,
Hmm.
things come back around and you get a chance to work on this, what I would say probably one of the greatest projects of your life. I know it's certainly one of the greatest projects of my life, and I'm not involved in it, so I can only imagine how you're feeling about it. um,
It's what's so great
worldwide
about it.
pants worldwide pants is part of this. When you and Dave talked, had you already been part of the doc? Like, was that one of the connections that was made? Is yes, I'm working on this doc that you guys are tangentially a part of?
I did bring it up. Yes.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So, and we can say that we're not breaking
Yeah,
any
I can
rules
I
by
can say
saying
I can say but I brought it up to him. Basically my general rule of thumb is because it is an ongoing project, I will talk about I can talk about it very broad strokes, anything
yes
that anyone knows reading the press release. If it's in the press release, I can talk about it. So
till it comes out, and when it comes out, you are coming on this show, and we're gonna go
yeah, I'll
deep on
come
Andy
in.
Kaufman. It's
Absolutely.
gonna be
Oh,
great.
I will. Oh, and that's the thing. Like I could talk about Andy for days, and I've got so much information about Andy just lodged in my head. Like, I mean, I've seen everything he's done. I've seen things that people haven't seen,
Yep.
listened to things. I mean, um, yeah, there's so much out there.
And to me, the idea of you being able to actually have a conversation with Dave about Andy is also just as
Yeah.
precious. I've got a shot on the set here. This is the shot right before Lawler's about
Yes.
to get up and smack Kaufman in the face. It's signed by Jerry because I actually have I have I have a connection to the pro wrestling world, and so because of that connection, I actually had a chance to talk to Jimmy Hart one night, the Mouth
All
of the South,
right.
Jimmy Hart, and Jimmy. He was quote unquote, they call it in the business, married. He was married to Andy Kaufman, which means they would do all of these shots down south when Andy was learning the art of professional wrestling. They'd be in the south and
Mm-hmm.
they'd be going from arena to arena. He rode in the car with Jimmy and they went to Graceland together and they spent. And so
Yeah.
Jimmy, who's used to answering questions about Bret Hart or Hulk Hogan and all that, when he came and worked for my promotion, I literally got 3.5 hours of Andy Kaufman stories of being on the road with him,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
it was fascinating because you got this guy who goes so deep into an art form, and wants to create this persona, and create reaction with people, not necessarily laughter, but reaction. It could be anger, it could be whatever. He wants to take an audience in the palm of his hand and kind of play around with them, and the very definition of a performance artist. I love Andy Kaufman. What was your gateway? How did you? Because you're younger than me. You're a Conan guy. You're not like
Yeah.
what was your gateway
Uh,
to Andy Kaufman?
it was just I had always I don't know. I think it was because I was such a Saturday Night Live fan. I was very familiar with Andy's kind of
Antics.
history with Saturday Night Live,
Yeah.
and I was fascinated and with the idea of what he had done. And then I think at some point I had seen like a biography special on him, and
Yep.
then I'd watched Man on the Moon,
Mhm.
and then I started in this was, I would have been a teenager. So I think by that point we had just gotten the Netflix DVD service. So I would get, the DVDs of Andy's, of some of the stuff that Andy had done, some of the DVD releases from over the years. So I just started watching whatever I could find on Andy, and then YouTube, of course. I started watching a lot of stuff on YouTube,
Mhm.
and I became fascinated with him when I was like 15 because I think there's something. So sorry about that. I think
No, no,
there's
no.
something about that age,
Yeah.
15, 16 years old, where there's something about that angsty part of your brain where you start to just challenge things. And
Yeah.
Andy would kind of challenge, not in a antagonistic way, although with the wrestling he could be antagonistic.
Sure.
Or with Tony Clifton, what he would do is he would challenge the idea of what was entertainment.
Yeah.
what it could be. And that is what I latched onto as a kid. And then, over the years, my favorite things about Andy now are his playfulness when he
Yeah.
does those things. I
Yeah.
love the playfulness of Andy. There's such an innocence to him. I think people always want to know, was he crazy? Was he this? Was he that? There's two quotes that I always turn to describe who Andy was. The first was in a book by Julie Hecht, and by the way, Bill Zehme's book on Andy, Lost on the Funhouse, is the book on Andy. If you want to know who Andy was, read that book.
Yep.
That book, when I discovered it when I was 16, that was my introduction to Bill. It told me so much about who Andy was. So anyway, Julie Hecht wrote a book that had a bunch of transcripts of her conversations with Andy.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, she was talking to Andy's mom, Janice, and she was trying to get a good read on Andy. And Janice had told her, with Andy, it's all about fun. He won't do it if it's not fun. And that, when I read that, told me immediately who Andy was. Everything he did, whether it was the wrestling, Tony Clifton, whether it was Mighty Mouse, everything he did was about fun.
Yep.
It was about what was fun to him and what he would hope other people would enjoy. Like, I mean, people saying, oh, he didn't care if the audience liked him or not. He cared to a degree. He knew what he was doing was fun for him, and he
Yep.
just, hope. I mean, he does what any entertainer would do, which is hope that the right people find his stuff. And I mean, it was true though. I mean, there was that part of him that didn't care, but also he did care. Like
Of
any
course he
entertainer
cares.
cares.
Yeah.
Right. Like any entertainer cares. And but it's a better story if you build him up to be this guy who he didn't care. And it's a better story. But
was
the
there a
other
second quote? Yeah, okay,
yes,
yeah.
Mary Lou Henner would her description of Andy was always that he was just a sweet Jewish boy from Long Island. And I feel like that sums him up too. I feel like that tells you exactly who Andy was. And strip away, everything that you know about him. You can boil it down to that. And that was the heart of him, was his heart. And people, I feel like, forget that. They look, he was such a genius with what he did with, he was so multifaceted. But at the end of the day, I mean, there was a sweetness to him that allowed the audience to want to go on this weird, insane journey with him. There had to be a lovable quality to him that he absolutely possessed.
I think that's why I was attracted to him in the first place, is because
Absolutely.
I love kindness. Kindness is one of my favorite things. I felt the same way about Paul Rubens. I felt the same way. I felt that was just the kindness that he had was a gateway
absolutely
to, yeah.
And because of that kindness, you will follow him when he's doing the wrestling and saying things that are completely unkind, but there's still a bit of a glimmer in his eye.
Yep.
When he's playing, he's only fooling.
We're gonna go deep about this when the doc does come out. I hope that the documentary gods, the distribution gods, the entertainment gods smile on us and we get it sooner than later. I cannot wait for this thing. Andrew, thank you. I can't thank you enough for doing this. We're gonna do this more, right? We can I want to.
My God, of course. No, there's so much we didn't go to. I could talk so much about Conan. I mean, the thing with Conan is like we barely scratch the surface. I mean, there's so much that I can talk about with that guy.
Me too. I'm a huge O'Brien enthusiast as well. So we could definitely
absolutely. I think he's the best. Like I really do. And I mean, just like the body of work, 28 years to go from a show that nobody thought would stand a chance. He had week to week renewals.
Yep.
And then he lasted 28 years on the air. And now, I mean, he's just as like, there's people that think that he's hit. Like, there's people that didn't watch his show that are massive fans of his podcast.
You
Like
think about
Andy,
Team Coco really kicked into gear
yeah.
when Late Shift 2 happened in
I
'09, '10. That was when
right.
it's
I've
crazy. He
talked to
needed that moment. Just like Dave not getting the Tonight Show, Conan
yeah,
almost, in a way, for his own legacy, needed that moment to move off into that
absolutely.
trajectory that made him just his own.
I've talked to Andy Kaufman's sister about Conan. She never watched him on late night. She never watched his TBS show. She never watched any of it. She loves his podcast.
Yeah, there you go.
And she's like, I love him so much. And I'm just like, there's something about him. Like that podcast is the best. I feel like the podcast is you get to realize who he is without the cameras,
Yeah.
and you get to just hear his playfulness. Again, I love playfulness, and he is one of the most playful guys out there. He'll just go on a
And
riff.
here's my envy. You've got a chance to talk to so many of these people, and so many of the people that are
Yes,
on the list that I have that you've talked to, we didn't get a chance to talk about. I can't wait for the next time that you come on the show.
absolutely. Anytime you
Now,
want me.
while this is happening, the wildfires are happening in LA. So I'm going to say to you, we're all hoping and praying for you. Last night, my wife and I
Thank
sat
you
on the
so
couch.
much.
Oh my gosh! Well, I've got so many friends down there, and I know folks who've lost
It's
their homes, and it's just it's
it's
so brutal.
horrible.
I
It
hope
it
that
it is. I can't look away. Like it's one
yeah,
of those things where, as soon as we're done here, I'm gonna go back to watching the news.
oh
And I did it all night. I didn't have to evacuate, luckily. I have friends that did.
yeah,
I know people that have probably lost things, and
yeah,
it's devastating. And
absolutely.
I mean, yesterday there was a cloud of smoke above my apartment. I looked outside and I just saw smoke,
Uh,
and I'm far from the Palisades. And this was before the Hollywood fire started.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
watching the Hollywood fire yesterday and then the Studio City fire, I'm just like, it got close. I'm about 20 minutes from Running Canyon.
Well,
And I've
we're
got
think
stories about hiking and running canyon with Kevin Smith. I mean, like so Kevin's the first person I thought about, which yeah, I just saw as we were starting. Kevin's
yeah.
okay, but I've gotten to know Kevin a little bit. I've got lots of stories about him, but
I can't wait to
uh,
talk about that with you too.
yeah.
Bear is driving car. Thank you.
How can that be?
How can that be? Thank you, buddy. I
Thank
appreciate this so
you.
much. We'll be in touch. And please keep me posted as to how you're doing and
I
making sure that you're
absolutely
safe.
will.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate
Thank
you
you.
so much, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for bearing with me.
Oh, anytime. Peace and love, and we'll talk to you soon.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, brother. Bye
All
bye.
right. Bye.
All right. We had a hard out on that one. See, Andrew and I, as you could probably tell, he and I could go hours. And we've texted back and forth since then saying, yeah, you know what, we can't wait to do this again. Uh, I just appreciate him so much. Anybody, I've always appreciated, and these are people who would be on these late night talk shows as guests, people who go and chase their dreams and something cool happens. I look at a guy like Andrew and it's like, oh man, yeah. And couldn't happen to a nicer guy. I just really appreciate that about him. The Letterman podcast has one sponsor only. That is hello-deli.com. Go to hello-deli.com. I just saw somebody in Rob Cates's Letterman fans group just exclaim that they found hello-deli.com, not through this show, not through other things, but they found it somehow and they got it. Someone ordered them a shirt and there was an email exchange and it was with Rupert himself and he was flabbergasted by it. That story tickled me pink this week. So anyway, hello-deli.com. Late Show with David Letterman merchandise from Rupert G himself. This has been another episode of the Letterman podcast with Mike Chisholm. Coincidentally, I am Mike Chisholm. Thank you and good night.
Overcoat and underpants.